Hi, I'm actor Ian Champion, and welcome to The History of Horror Cinema, a personal podcast journey through the good, bad, and ugly of the history of horror movies, based on my blog, The History of Horror Cinema. Mark of the Vampire, 1935. By the mid-1930s, the horror film was spinning its wheels, killing time between its initial fever of box office excitement that began with Universal's Dracula and Frankenstein in 1931 to 1932, through a gradual slump until the genre was revitalized again in 1938 by the surprise double-bill hit pairing of the two by an enterprising cinema owner in New York. Despite twitchings of hope such as The Mummy and James Whale's The Invisible Man and Bride of Frankenstein, the patient was in a coma during the middle of the decade. Todd Browning's Mark of the Vampire, released after a title change from Vampires of Prague in 1935, is a good example, being a waste of numerous talents including Browning himself. The director had gone from the artistic high point of his vampire classic and the sensationally controversial Freaks in 1932 to what feels like a road company retread of his better days. The MGM film was meant to be a remake of his lost 1927 London After Midnight for the same studio. But as David J. Scal points out in his excellent book The Monster Show, it also bears a parallel resemblance to Browning's Dracula, the comparison marked most starkly by an almost wordless, demeaning vampire cameo from the earlier movie's star Bela Lugosi. Indeed, most of the name cast are squandered, and there are many other elements mirroring the Universal film. The mysterious death at home of the wealthy Sir Karol Boratin, horror film stalwart Holmes Herbert, leaves the locals to suspect vampirism due to the tiny puncture marks on his neck. Browning weaves in their superstitious fears via a graveyard prologue featuring a gypsy woman scared by the old, unreliable bat on a stick. A holidaying English couple scoff at such myths. They'll never believe that at the club. Yet the villagers' terror is much more real than the rubber bats. They speak in hushed tones of the legendary Count Mora, his name taken from the Bohemian word for vampire. In comes the intrepid Inspector Newman from Prague to investigate in the moustached form of an underused Lionel Atwill, assisted by another character player, Donald Meek's quivering Dr. Dostil. The dead Sir Karol leaves behind 2 children, as well as Baron Otto, who will run the estate for them. The Baron is Jean Hersholt, whose film roles were overshadowed by his humanitarian efforts on behalf of the industry, that led to the Academy Award for such services given out thereafter in his name. Sadly, there's not much aid that can help here, as gradually more talent is drafted in to precious little effect. Elizabeth Allen is the beautiful daughter and main inheritor Irina, later required to essentially be the Mina Harker victim to the eventual vampire. Her brother Fedor, Henry Wadsworth, collapses upon entering, in a weakened, delirious state, after falling inexplicably near the castle. He bears a triangular set of needle pricks to his neck as well. This allows us a first glimpse of Lugosi as the evil Count Mora, accompanied by the hot but blank Carol Borland as his goth paramour Luna. They have rented the nearby castle, which, like his performance, references Dracula in all but name, right down to the scurrying armadillo, bats, and splendidly effective gigantic web that promotional photos use to great effect. We must rely on his trusty, menacing glower expression more than usual in Mark of the Vampire, as unfortunately right up till the epilogue he is reduced to literally silent vamping with his partner. The blood-stained residue of a bullet wound to the temple is intriguing. Scal attributes this to a suicide backstory following incest with his daughter. However, due to the censor erasing any such distaste, it is never referenced. Rather than a strategic cameo lent by a powerhouse name, this was a woeful waste of Lugosi, a talent who in a few short years was already reduced to taking what he could get. Possibly the greatest contribution to Mark of the Vampire is the excellent cinematography by the celebrated James Wong Howe, double Oscar winner out of 10 career nominations for The Rose Tattoo and HUD. He was famous for filming actresses most flatteringly, and without resorting to soft focus or gauze trickery, and was renowned for his artistic philosophy of collaborating with his director early in the planning stages and adjusting his technique to suit the material. Since by all accounts Browning had acceded the look and some direction of Dracula to the equally talented cameraman Karl Freund, one wonders to what extent he gave the same control to Howe, as the most vivid aspect of the film is its visuals, the use of shadows and the foggy sets showcasing Lugosi and Borland work well. It's also worth noting the sound design that enhances the creepiness of the atmosphere when the undead are lurking with a highly effective soft breeze, the low human moaning of tortured souls. In terms of performance, the sole one of interest is that of Lionel Barrymore, elder of the Barrymore acting dynasty and brother of John, whose Professor Zelen brings the occult knowledge that pinpoints him as the film's homage to Count Dracula's nemesis Van Helsing. He gives Zelen a beetle-browed scholarly energy that enlivens the movie somewhat. Like his inspiration, he struggles to protect the family from the undead, urging the maid and butler to strew bat-thorn around the house. This cues an attack on the staff from Count Mora, appearing in a slapdash effect shot that crudely cuts from a jiggling wire bat emitting smoke to Lugosi without any attempt at a merging dissolve. Barrymore's enthusiasm provides a moment of amusement as he relishes the moment of vampire dispatch, not knowing that Mora is outside the room. The head must be severed with one clean stroke, and a sprig of bat-thorn placed within the gaping wound. Lugosi's expression of concern as he hears this is priceless. In the end, where Mark of the Vampire cleaves closest to London After Midnight is in the third-act revelation that the whole setup has been conceived in order to trap Baron Otto into revealing himself as the murderer, including the vampires. He undergoes hypnosis, causing him to reenact his poisoning and marking of Sir Carol's neck on the night of the crime. I'm no expert in law, but would hypnotic recall be viable in court as evidence of previous action, or thrown out as possibly an act of imagination instead? I'm probably looking too deeply into this elaborate web, which is more than Lugosi was able to do. After his own trance-like autopilot stalking, he only gets to speak at the very end, when we see him and Borland revealed as travelling actors backstage next to their theatrical's wicker basket. There's a tragic irony to his grandeur when he says, "This vampire business has given me a great idea for a new act," as the next 2 decades were to see him terminally wedded to his most popular role, a tour de force becoming forced to tour, slogging endless, increasingly tawdry stage shows of Dracula around the US until his death.